Unseen City, The Psychic Lives of the Urban Poor, is an interdisciplinary study of the relationship between global cities, poverty, and psychoanalysis across three continents. It examines literary representations of poverty in relation to each city's psychoanalytic and psychiatric culture, particularly as that culture is fostered by state policies that regulate the welfare needs of impoverished populations. The book draws a through line between precarity and mental illness through clinical case studies, the product of extensive collaborations and knowledge sharing with community psychotherapeutic initiatives in 6 global cities. These are read contrapuntally with fiction and non-fiction narratives that explore subject formation and social death at the intersections of class, race, globalization, and migrancy. Unseen City argues that a humanistic understanding of the living, suffering, and surviving lives of the dispossessed is key to an adapted psychoanalysis of the poor and for the poor, and that seeking equity of the psychoanalytic unconscious is key to poverty alleviation. I was introduced to psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic criticism, and the history of medicine in graduate school when I wrote a PhD on hysteria in Victorian melodrama. Around the same time as my fascination with psychoanalysis waned, so I found it too metropolitan, too status laden, trendy even, I discovered an overlooked moment in the history of psychoanalysis when a pronouncement by Sigmund Freud inspired a mental health cooperative movement globally. So, 2 months before the armistice at the Fifth International Congress of Psychoanalysis in Budapest, Sigmund Freud famously declared that the poor man should have just as much assistance for his mind as he now has to the life saving help offered by surgery. And between 1918 and 1938, Freud's pronouncement on free clinics helped create a dozen health clinics from Zagreb to London. And these were free clinics, literally and metaphorically, as Elizabeth Danto states. They were free of charge, but more importantly, they freed people of destructive neuroses. So this learning about this was an eye opener for me. You know, a generation of reformist and activist psychoanalysts who wanted to claim the right to mental health care as a human right. What drew me to the project was also the opportunity of bringing together cultural discourses and mental health paradigms to read and interpret the nexus of poverty and mental health. Unseen City argues very forcefully that humanities should be allowed to play a role in concerted cross disciplinary efforts towards the alleviation of poverty and the provision of material aid. Finally, I knew that I would be able to read literature and case studies alike to capture not only the maladies, but the well springs of psychic life of the urban poor, with its unrecorded acts of survivalism and resilience and capability. So, this kind of research facilitates a re examination of the aims and scope of therapy, allowing it to draw on the resourcefulness of lives that are disfigured by hunger, poverty, racism, or historical crises such as war or migration. And it redefines key concepts of psychoanalytic theory, such as trauma, PTSD, the uncanny, fugue states, or transience. I knew I would have to start in the global metros such as Mumbai, London, New York, as these help us study the very infrastructure that causes urban poverty. They also foster the psychological avoidance mechanisms with which we, in deeply unequal cities, negotiate visibility, what we see and unsee, what we choose not to see, and what we must not see. So, the Sea View Hotel room in Mumbai that asks us to skim the slum view of blue tarpaulin roofs before hitting the waves, or the National Geographic master shot of a Mumbai slum, which not only provides a composite overview of the teeming life it barely understands, but allows us to put this master shot in a comparative frame with other favelas, barrios, council estates, high rises. I added Kolkata, Chennai, and Bengaluru as these cities had path-breaking initiatives in community psychotherapy. I mean, I was led to these sites by exemplary stories of guerrilla mental health activists about whose daring initiatives I write about in the book. And finally, because some of these cities were the very centers where psychoanalysis has thrived, it helped me to start my journey at, for instance, the Indian Psychoanalytical Society in Kolkata, or the London Clinic of Psychoanalysis in London, or the William Alanson White Institute in New York. The Berlin Clinic was terminated in 1933, the Vienna Ambulatorium in 1938. The Nazis deleted psychoanalysis, as Elizabeth Danto says in Red Vienna, as well as other originating sites of the free clinic movement. In my book, I have written about the unfulfilled promise of the free clinic movement in London, for instance. Ernest Jones, who was president of the British Psychoanalytical Society, was more conservative compared to the social democratic thinkers and analysts across Europe in the aftermath of World War I. His ambivalence toward institutions such as the Berlin Polyclinic was related to long held beliefs about the medical foundation for effective psychoanalysis, which rendered the clinical authority of non medical and lay analysts inauthentic. This changed when a former patient of his, the American industrialist Prince Hopkins, donated £2,000 to set up a clinic for the purposes, this was the mission statement, for the purposes of rendering psychoanalytic treatment available for patients of the poorer classes. And this free clinic opened on Freud's 70th birthday, May 6, 1926, at 36 Gloucester Place, London, W1. In the first 10 years, over 600 people were seen by either Jones or by Ernest Goover. They were psychoanalytic cases, with treatment lasting between 6 months and 4 years. By 1929, all of the members of the Psychoanalytical Society were nominated clinic assistants, required to treat one patient daily at the clinic, or an equivalent amount, and imposition, this which actually met with protests and attempts at variation of duty. During the Second World War, the clinic not only continued to function, but it became an emergency center for psychological aid. But there were certain milestones in the half century that follows that made sure that this did not remain a free clinic. The free clinic became a part of the newly instituted National Health Service, or NHS as we call it, in 1948. Wilfred Bion became clinic director in 1953, revising the fee structure to introduce a means-tested sliding scale, so it was no longer a free clinic. There was rising disquiet in the 60s and 70s about the clinic's function as a training institute for students, and the NHS stopped funding the clinic in 1990. So, this is just kind of like one of the many kind of granular accounts I provide in the book about how a given free clinic stops being so and becomes, of course, it becomes a more sliding scale a low fee clinic rather than a free clinic. During my research for Unseen City, I collaborated with the Tavistock Trust, a not-for-profit public benefit corporation which provides over half of the NHS's mental health provision. The initiative of the Tavistock Trust that I worked with is titled PCPCS, the City and Hackney Primary Care Psychotherapy Consultation Service, and I focused on their horticultural psychotherapeutic group run by two Turkish analysts for the Turkish migrant population in Hackney. So this is a very impoverished community, and unemployment rates, social housing levels, and the proportion of those never having worked or having long-term unemployment can be twice as high as the city average. The square foot system of gardening makes it feel manageable, while proximity to the earth and community through shared learning provides attachment security. The horticultural therapy program lasts for 12 months for each cohort. So each day's gardening, this happens once a week, is followed by a 1 hour meeting, group therapy over tea in the garden shed, where the rules are revisited for newcomers and expectations of members reiterated. Therapy in this setting at the St. Mary's Garden involves grounding, mindfulness exercises, part of the psychoeducation geared to foster embodied self-awareness in patients and an enhanced sense of being present. The therapists borrow from the toolkit of emotion-focused and experiential psychodynamic therapies. So one of the case studies I gathered here is about a 57-year-old man, a shopkeeper, with no record of mental illness, whose life takes a tragic turn following a road accident. His physical injury was not considered severe, and he was discharged from hospital in a day. However, he deteriorates rapidly from this event, losing almost all his meager language skills. Withdrawn, forgetful, unable to leave his house, the only words he can muster are, "I do not know." At first, the group coordinators are not sure he would join the Hackney gardening project, but they invite him anyway and he agrees to come. As the weeks progress, he starts working actively in the gardening segment of the sessions, and he begins to share stories of his life. He has small interactions with those around him, and he shows interest in their lives, asking questions from time to time. In 6 months, the therapists observe he's the most loved member in the group. 3 months after the gardening cohort disbands, the therapists have a review meeting with the man who arrives with his wife. I'm going to read from the case notes here. They are smiling and happy. He says that he's working with his son now, going out, carrying on with his life. His relationships are more fulfilling and relaxed, says the man who, during his first assessment, could not string together answers and was not able to clear his nose when he cried. What happened to this man during his time in the group may seem mysterious, says Ahmet Kaglar, one of the Turkish psychotherapists I work closely with. The therapy in St. Mary's Garden is about the disease of parallax, which restores functionality and capability in a world where historical truths kill. In Kaglar's assessment, the care and compassion provided by the group in a safe and non-judgmental assessment, in a safe and non-judgmental environment, helped this man to connect to the healing potential which we all have as he returns to the quotidian endurance of a care-filled life. I started work on my fourth book, which is on pre-Freudian dream thought, theory, writing, and architecture. It looks at works of literature which use dreaming as a ruse for unintentional and even reluctant authorship. A twinned cultural history of dreaming and writing. The book examines paradoxical juxtapositions of literary activism and radicalism, and experimental literary forms which seem to celebrate artlessness and a loss of agency. So here I read Romantic, Victorian, and modernist literature. The time period is roughly 1815 to 1950, reclaiming pre-Freudian theories and philosophies of dreams that had served as intertexts for these works. The purpose of the dream book is not just piecing together a genealogy of dream theory extrapolated from literature, but presenting four challenging new perspectives on the following: the Anthropocene, the prison industrial complex, the refugee crisis and placelessness, and finally, cyborg feminism beyond the heterosexual family. My authors and dreamers are Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Thomas de Quincey, Charles Dickens, W.E.B. Du Bois, Virginia Woolf, and Ruqya Sakhawat Hussain. And the dreams are both recompositions of industrial and colonial modernity and visions of the countermodern or countercultures of the modern. I'm also working on a collaborative volume for Cambridge University Press. Here, this work I'm co-editing with Arthur Quaison, and it is called Decolonizing the English Literary Curriculum.